weren't able to join us today. So the team felt we should give ourselves ample time to talk about some of the things we're working on. So we'll do that. And as far as that FCC topic, it's either going to be on the agenda for either for September or October for sure. So one of those two, and we're working on finalizing some dates there. So with that, we can move into the report out from the groups. So we'll start out with the Minnesota Model Subgroup. And Brian, maybe I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, Teddy, thank you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
All right. We've just got 3 points that we thought we would address with the group. And probably the third one may prompt a little bit more discussion. Some of these are kind of direct related to the program. The first thing is that we need the Office of Broadband Development fully funded. In visiting with Diane, they are backfilling for the 2 vacant positions is underway. But we need to continue the further funding to continue the work, the great work of the Office of Broadband Development. The other topic is we have no funding for the Office of Broadband Development after this round of grants. We need grant funding to continue the program that's laid out. And I think this is a real critical issue, regardless of any changes or tweaks that we make to the program, is that we really need funding. And the third item is that, as we've seen, there's a lot of broadband discussion with the COVID and everything going on, the CARES Act, and there's a lot of things going on. I guess it was a little frustrating just from the committee is that the Minnesota Governor's task force really is not being involved in some of these things. And I don't know if there's some direct communication with the administration. But you know, there's a lot of programs, private government partnerships, and it just seems that maybe we're not being utilized as a committee. And I'll have to say, Bernadine's being the rock star and working with a lot of different groups. I'm also part of the Minnesota Broadband Coalition, and Steve and Bernadine kind of led the speed testing with GeoSource yesterday. So again, there's a lot of activity, but some of that just it seems like it would be a natural to involve our committee, especially the CARES Act. I think Steve asked the question pertaining to how this funding is going. It's not going to a state level, but yet we still have the concerns not only with students being able to do distance learning, but it's really a household impacting that households that are having to do telework, families, and all of that. So I'll again, I think it's part of the deal is how do we get the attention that we need to be a part of this. And I'd open it up for Paul and Teresa and Steve maybe to share any comments that they would have.
I'm just interested in Bernadine sharing a little bit more about what she was sharing in the chat. I'm interested in knowing how we could possibly partner and just more about it. Are you looking, like Best Buy, I believe, is part of it. Are they donating tablets, laptops? I just don't understand the funding yet. I just need more clarification, I guess.
Sure. Teddy, is it okay if I go ahead and respond to that now?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Thanks for the question, Teresa. We are, I think in all candor, the bottom line to how can we layer in internet service providers and other private sector partners that might want to contribute devices or connectivity is still kind of to be determined in our next phase. We're kind of chunking the work out, and the initial announcement of the request for proposal for grant applications just hit the street. And as I said in the chat box, those proposals are due September 1st. We have about $2 million available in cash that we will distribute during this initial round of grants at a maximum grant size of about $150,000. And your question, Teresa, about partnerships with ISPs and device providers is something that we are looking at, trying to figure out how to layer that on. Right now, we're collecting inquiries and expressions of interest. So if there's anybody on the call that is a private sector partner or has selling devices or connectivity subscriptions, that kind of thing, please do reach out to me and we will add you to the list of interested partners. But Teresa, in all candor, we haven't figured that out yet. It's kind of our next bucket of work about how can we do a better job of bringing together all of the resources that providers and device purveyors have and want to come alongside. The other thing that we're kind of looking at potentially at a statewide level is sort of a statewide computer collection recycling effort. We've seen other states do this at a statewide level. And in the recommendation I'm going to be bringing forward from the subcommittee, there's a recommendation that kind of aligns with that effort. So we can talk more about that when I do my report. But just in general, if more questions about this, please feel free to reach out to me and or see that there is a frequently asked questions, a FAQ on the St. Paul, Minnesota website that I put in the link. So you can go there for additional background as well as reach out to me. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much.
So Brian, one of the things that was, go ahead, Paul. Yep, go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna, since we've been talking about the CARES Act and this new initiative, I get in my clips, I saw where Alabama's allocating $100 million in broadband connectivity for students. They're using a portion of their CARES Act in the way of vouchers. It's a public-private partnership. It seems like this is, ours is more of a fundraising with, corporations and others, where we could be using, the governor could be trying to allocate some of the CARES Act money directly to this and get this up and running a lot quicker. It just, I don't know all the details, but the press release, vouchers for internet service and or devices, and basically there's some basic eligibility that could probably get into the hands of students and parents a lot quicker. Just some thought.
No, that's a good point, and I'm not sure even the CARES Act how that's really going to be. I know there were some discussions about how to allocate it at some point, but I haven't heard any updates on that. I don't know if the rest of the task force has any updates on how Minnesota is planning on using some of the CARES Act with respect to telemedicine, teleeducation, and even some of the infrastructure funding.
Teddy, what I could offer is that the governor has allocated or set aside $14 million of all of the GEARS money, the governor's emergency educational reform funds that he received. 14 million of that funding has been set aside for this intersection of devices, connectivity, and supporting services. So they carved that out of the GEARS money, and then this partnership that I'm talking about, the additional funding that we're raising and the coordination with private partners is meant to augment that and come alongside. So Paul's really right about different states are taking different cuts at this. I mentioned that in Denver or in Colorado, the governor there has launched a statewide effort to collect refurbished computers. We've seen the state of Washington step up. The Office of Broadband Development there and the governor spoke on behalf of this crowdsourcing speed test that we in Minnesota are doing collaboratively with not-for-profit partners because the state chose not to take a role in that. So this is just all of us coming around together trying to do what we can given the decisions being made by the governor's office about how they're going to spend their money.
That kind of goes back to Brian's point, is how do we coordinate, or at least the third point that was mentioned, right? How do we coordinate these efforts so they feel like it's a unified approach, not sort of different things here and there, which are very powerful if you bring them together. Is that the point, Brian? I mean, kind of on that third piece?
Yeah, it was, Teddy. And I think the other thing is that, we've been after funding just to continue the Minnesota model, which we've all stated is every other state is envying it and copying it, but we can't get funding to be able to move forward because what we're doing does help all of the above. With distance learning, it helps schools, it helps everything, and it just seems like again that we're not being utilized to be able to use some of those CARES resources. I think another example. State of Iowa has allocated $80 million for broadband grants. Again, they have to be used by the end of the year, shovel-ready projects. But those dollars went into to infrastructure type stuff as part of the CARES Act. So every state has, as Bernadine said, has a little different twist on how they're utilizing those. But it would be nice if at least we or even Diane could get a seat at the table there to provide some input to the administration that we've got a need here. Thank you.
Very good. And then the last question, sort of. Go ahead, Teresa.
I was just going to say, with the broadband grant program, wasn't that with surplus money? And now there isn't going to be surplus money due to this pandemic? Is that what our thinking is? And that's why we're concerned about going forward?
Yeah, the surplus is not there. And then there was discussions about even how to use the federal funding that was coming in. And there were some discussions at the House, at the Senate level, and then that sort of dormant, right? Other things got involved in there. So, and then I'm guessing it's up to the governor on how to allocate the funding. And I think one of the things we could push for is the fact that to the point of having some sort of a seat at the table, whether it's a small group from the broadband team, from the task force, or having us kind of put together a recommendation, or even having the Office of Broadband Development having a seat at the table there would be good. So that's something we could push for sure.
Teddy, I'd just like to clarify for Teresa. So it's true that the program funding, the operational funding for Office of Broadband Development has never been included in the base budget. It was the recommendation of the last Governor's Broadband Task Force that be changed and that the office be included in the base budget. And so part of what we're looking for, I think, this year, the opportunity is not only to get it funded, but to get it out of this kind of crisis funding mode and into the base budget. You'll be hearing from our subcommittee that in addition to Brian's recommendation that he's talked about funding the grant program, that also in accordance with previous recommendations from previous task force, our recommendation is that the office be funded for adoption as well as deployment. So we can talk about that more. But the challenge is to get it into the base budget because we've just been funding it out of extra money up to this point.
Gotcha.
Yeah, and so one of the things for the subgroup to think about, I think, is how do we make that recommendation, right? So is it about the Office of Broadband should be in the base budget, right? So just to fund the office, and then obviously then there's grants that happen on a yearly basis or every other year to hit certain targets. Should it be done that way, or should there be some other funding that's actually in the base budget as well? In addition, so up till now, that's exactly right. It's just been happening on a kind of like, let's talk about it every 2 years, right? And then we'll make some allocation towards it. But something different could be a recommendation that comes from our group. And one good place to start, as Bernadine mentioned, could be the recommendation, at least that was brought together for the previous task force, to say at least what was recommended there and what adjustments or amendments we might want to make to that one.
Well, and I don't think the task force should go on forever as far as broadband, because once you reach some of your goals, then you've reached your goals. So I don't know. I guess we just have to keep talking about it.
Hey, this is Steve Fensky. I was involved in some of that discussion of how to use the CARES money at the legislature, and there's concern about whether the money could be used within the year for infrastructure. Now, maybe there's other ways, like Paul was saying, where you could do some other different kind of deployment and if that's the case, they kind of dropped the ball. But the other piece of this too is Teresa was saying, well, it shouldn't go on forever, which makes sense because we want to solve the problem. But I'd like to throw out the idea that maybe we look at a third date, a third speed goal, because we're getting to the point where the first one's going to be up and we're going to be into the second one. And especially given the budget outlook this year, I don't know that we would make that. So I think we should probably look at whether that's changing the years that are in there now, or changing, adding a third speed goal, if you will, a 2030 goal or something like that.
Thank you, Steve. I really appreciate you raising that. I always wanted to ask this subcommittee about the speed goal because, again, I remember the last task force report looked to this task force to review our existing speed goals in the state. And it was my understanding that it really was the Minnesota model subgroup that was looking at potentially revising or making a recommendation to the full task force about our speed goals. And so I'm glad you've raised it. I wanted to ask, too, what the subgroup's thinking was about bringing forward to the full task force a revised speed goal, what your thinking was about that.
Well, I'm thinking out loud a little bit right now, so maybe the Minnesota Model Group could look at that, whether that's this year or next year. But given the funding issue, I think that might be appropriate to look at just pushing dates or adding the third speed goal date, just to kind of recognize it's probably going to take longer, as there won't be surplus and we'll be fighting over the same general fund dollars that everybody fights over.
This is Paul. I think we also need to keep in mind we still have a 2026 speed goal out there. I'm a little concerned about a third speed goal when we're not even in 2026. We don't know yet the amount of money, the potential for broadband funding that could be coming to Minnesota federally over the next several months. Hopefully, if Congress can get its act together, they could really. My only concern is we come up with some number and then we create a mapping system. Well, we're not at this number, so therefore we've got to. It's almost becomes a self-fulfilling chase for more dollars based on some number that we just projected out there. I think we've got a number that 25.3. I think we're well over. I think it's like 85% of the states covered by that, and now we have a 2026 that we can point to, and I think it'd be interesting to see how quickly we can get to that based on the additional funding that's going to be coming in from the feds over the next several months, hopefully.
I wouldn't mind waiting that discussion, but we have not just this year's, but over time, this could be looked at again. Things are going to change, so I get that, but I think we're going to come to next year. We're going to slow down compared to where we've been in past years as far as development with the grant program.
I'd like to see getting the unserved. Yeah, I just want to say I want to see the unserved, totally unserved, get what's due. So the 25.3 goal we have to fix first, and then we talk. We got to finish that.
I think one of the topics at our next meeting in September is going to be have Diane and Angie kind of go a little bit deeper into that, as far as the numbers, the mapping, the kind of where we are and how we measure that. So I think that would be really good fuel for continuing this conversation, and then also making a recommendation in the latter part of the year. Okay. Any more questions or comments to this subgroup? Awesome.
Thanks, Teddy.
Thank you. It's good stuff. Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you, Ryan. All right, let's move on to the next one on technology, the barriers and technology subgroup. So, Dave, I don't know if Mark is on, or at least Dave.
Good morning, Teddy. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
Perfect. So the task force didn't, the subgroup didn't meet in July, but we did exchange messaging and had a few phone calls between each of us, knowing that we'd want to present some discussion today. And one interesting thing that we feel has been revealed, or at least the barriers have been revealed, is the COVID-19 pandemic is definitely proving that we need universal broadband access. And some of the lessons that we're putting together based on that include upload speeds or symmetrical services, pretty much critical for home officing and distance learning. Understanding the 2026 goal does certainly work for home officing and distance learning. We're seeing that in-home Wi-Fi performance determines how well things work. I think subscribers or users need to have some insight or education on how those devices determine how well their connection is working. Wireless congestion can reduce the value of hotspots in certain areas. Not in every case, but certainly more education is needed in how those devices are deployed. Available public Wi-Fi locations being identified so people can drive up to them and get data in an emergency or a on-demand type scenario would be useful to have a database where all the public Wi-Fi locations are at. It's not an end-all solution, but it certainly helps. We're hoping that communication between the Department of Education, OBD, and the Governor's Office continues. That messaging is critical when service providers are responding to distance learning needs and requirements. The other piece that we're looking at is the availability of fiber optic cable. Construction contractors can make rapid builds very difficult to accomplish late in the year. I think lead times for any gross fiber optic cable order, if you ordered cable today, it would be shipping about March 1st of 2021. So just instantly building something because dollars are available makes it very difficult, especially if the grants are time dependent. We also talked about auctions can be a barrier if you're not aware of the process around them. The RDOF auction is scheduled for late October. That'll be interesting. I mentioned the CBRS auction earlier today, and I believe round 19 is happening right now. And then the last item, we had some discussion around the data, and a mapping system determines its value, differentiating between service offerings, subscription or subscriber takes is one area we want to look deeper into to make sure that the data is presenting an accurate ability of the service providers. But it's exciting to see the amount of energy going into mapping, because that certainly is a clearinghouse for data for the end users. So guidance will be needed in that area as well. And on that's what we discussed.
Thanks, Dave. That's super helpful. Quick question. I know one of the things that we're also trying to bring to this task force, we just haven't been successful as far as presentation is concerned, is something around satellites and ability to use that kind of a technology. Is the team also looking into the various technologies that can be available, and is there something that we need to bring forward besides the low orbit satellites to the conversation?
A great point, Teddy. The task force should hear more about the low Earth orbit satellite services, such as that Starlink project that Elon Musk is putting together. We do have that listed. We didn't take it up in July, but it is one of our task items that we're going to plow through.
Okay.
I think Elon is still getting everything working up there too.
Yeah, that will take some time, but it'll be interesting to see as we go forward. And also, I don't know about the kind of service levels they can provide going forward, as it's still kind of coming together. But just something to keep an eye on, along with other key technologies as well.
Absolutely.
A question questions for this, or questions or comments for this subgroup? Okay. Thanks, Dave. Appreciate the update there. Okay, and then we'll go to the next one on the economic development and digital inclusion. So, Bernadine.
Thanks, Teddy. So our subgroup is me, Dale, and Micah, and we have met since we last came together as a full task force, but I really don't have much of an update from the report we gave last meeting when we previewed the 4 recommendations that we are intending to bring forward to the full group. As I said last time, our team, much like we heard from Brian so eloquently, is all enthusiastic to support a recommendation that we would fund the state broadband grant program. We want to see that put in the base budget. That's a recommendation we're anticipating seeing coming forward from one of the other task force subgroup, but we would enthusiastically support that, encourage that kind of recommendation. And as I mentioned, additionally, to create an operating fund to promote adoption and use and redress digital inequity. So that would be a partnership, kind of a parallel recommendation in addition to the grant funding, that we would create state funded broadband adoption and use programs out of the office. The third recommendation is one that we're bringing forward from past task force, and it's an example of the kind of coordination that the office could do on computer recycling, refurbishment, and redistribution. I mentioned that earlier. You can expect to see from us a recommendation that would charge the task the Office of Broadband Development with building and coordinating a computer donation partnership between state agencies and community-based organizations that would help get those used refurbished computers into the hands of qualifying families who need them. We're thinking that we've seen this leadership role taken by state broadband offices in other states where they could stimulate that redistribution effort by working with other state agencies and not-for-profits. And so that's really the third recommendation that we're looking at. And then finally, in our purview historically for the task force has been making sure that the state fully funds analogous funding streams for broadband access and adoption in the libraries and school eras. So we're looking at the Telecommunications Access Equity Aid, the T program, make sure that the state funding cap allows the state to fully maximize those federal dollars that are available for telecommunications access for schools. And so we will be making sure when we come forward with our final text that we have the appropriate language in here that encourages the legislature to fully fund the T Act. I think that is the final thing, I guess, report update from our task force is that has to do with the October conference, or the October meeting. Teddy talked about the September meeting, but in October, the task force will be meeting, spending that morning in conversation with community broadband champions who will be presenting to the annual broadband conference. I think most people on the task force know that the Office of Broadband Development and Blandon have partnered over the last bunch of years to have this statewide annual conference. And it's going to be a fully digital, virtual experience this year. We're dispersing it across the month of October. But the morning when we meet as a task force, we'll be spending in listening to and then in small group discussions with community broadband champions. We'll be talking about the difference that the state broadband program has made in their communities. Diane and Angie are identifying a suite of projects that represent kind of the breadth and diversity of state-funded broadband projects. And our hope is that people on the task force who will be able to, hear about the impact of those investments, and then be in small group conversations to dig deeper and find out how that grant program and the difference it's making. We hope that'll advance the overall work of the task force in our report. With that, I know both Dale and Mike are on today. I'd like to just invite either of them to add any additional comments to the report, and then happy to field any questions.
Alberti, I don't have anything. I think you did a good job in summarizing what we about. But actually, I take that back. There's one thing looking at when we talk about getting the devices in the hands and looking at. I know you provided the statute for state agencies, but looking at from corporate and looking at. I'm doing some research with who we use for our leasing and looking at being able to incentivize these suppliers to be able to put these devices, make them available at a discounted price back into these programs that we can use for getting devices in folks' hands.
I don't know. No, Dale is on. We're able to hear him or not. So one comment that I have, Bernadine and Dale and Micah, is as part of this subgroup, I think the recommendations are really good ones, and those are the right ones to pursue. It'll be interesting, especially when we talk about economic development and digital inclusion, to potentially think of some examples. I know that we talked about this in the past, right? Where there is good connectivity, look how individuals, communities have flourished, and even students are doing really well. Where there is a lack of connectivity, the other side of it is here's where we have gaps, issues, and problems. So that would be good to kind of bring one or two examples of sorts like that in part of our report, just so that it becomes a little more tangible, right? And about when we talk about there's not exclusion or inclusion, what that means for the citizens of Minnesota. So I think that would be very, very powerful. But I'll leave it to you. I think you have plenty of them that you can draw from. So it'll be good to kind of incorporate something like that into our report or recommendation. Questions, comments for this subgroup? Okay. Hearing none, we'll kind of move on to the next piece. So the next one, and I'd like to get some feedback, potentially even from folks that have done this in the past, is really we probably need to prepare a report of sorts at the end of this year, right? Of kind of the things we've learned and some of the recommendations that we're talking about. And part of the push to, like I said, we don't have any set in stone recommendations. There's still lots of topics we need to go through as subgroups. It's just to think of like, okay, what's our final output and how do we want to present it, right? And so there's going to be some sort of a report that comes out at the end. There's not. I don't know if there's a question there. Okay. Was there a question? Okay. So now I was just thinking through. Okay, what does that look at the end, and how can we start working towards that? That's a little bit of the push for having some sort of thought process around some recommendations. I know I've seen various reports from a recommendation, and there's going to be more depth to that recommendation with some background information, but then we could, at the beginning of the report, we could have the list of here's the recommendations, and then there's some sort of an executive summary that we could put together. So what I was thinking is I was going to start working on the skeleton and then passing it around. It's something maybe we could review at the next task force meeting to say this is what it could look like. And we could all have various inputs on it, and how that should look. And then there's the part of the writing, which is writing the report itself. One of the things I'm trying to do, see if I can find them, and I don't know if I mentioned it in the previous task force, is to potentially have some folks helping with the writing and some of the coordination aspect, right, for each subgroup, and then obviously we're on at the overall. So I was trying to look for 3 writers. This is something that Blue Ribbon Council had done, and it worked very effectively to have somebody just organize the information and start writing some of the content, and not really influence the content per se, because obviously task force members are responsible for that. So I've recruited one person to help with this. Still looking for two more, if that's possible. If you know of folks that would be good at doing this, please send me a recommendation on that, and we can include them with your subgroups in the meetings going forward, so they can listen in, capture some of the notes, and start putting some of this data together. And then for the final report, we may want to put together. So that's what I had in mind. Again, this is just a thought process at this moment, but it's early enough. We're kind of in the middle of the year. I wanted to open it up and see what other recommendations other task force members may have. Like I said, there's some of you have been on this task force in the past and know what works and what doesn't work well. Other of you are new to it but may have some fresh ideas. So what are some thoughts from the group?
Teddy's Brian. I liked Bernadine talked about the broadband champions. I think if we can add some testimonials in there on past successes and how valuable our program is, that would only reinforce what we're trying to accomplish to get part of the general fund or the regular state funding. So, just a thought.
And see if anyone's willing or a business is willing to pay out to change them having good broadband compared to none. Instead of the stories about how we need it, we all know that there's a dire need in outstate especially, so just the success stories I think would be good.
Teddy, I think most people on the call are familiar with the Blind on Broadband blog, and know that Ann Tracy, who runs that blog, is with us today. She reports on all these meetings. I think Ann is the one Minnesotan that's attended maybe every single broadband task force meeting since they were first stood up. Anyway, I just wanted to, on behalf of Blannon Foundation, put Ann Tracy and the blog at the disposal of the task force. I hope her fingers aren't flying off the keyboard, but she anticipated this. So that blog has an amazing search function. It's amazing. All the news is fit to print about broadband, and there's just a ton of archives in there, first-person accounts, testimonials, stories, what's working well, what's not, and that'll be a rich field for us to mine, your authors and others, Teddy, to find stories, testimonials, and examples. So I feel like we're well positioned as a state to have that wonderful archive thanks to Ann's hard work. So that'll be a resource for us if we choose to use it.
Awesome. Yeah, that'll be great. Other questions, other comments or thoughts?
This is Jason from Fond du Lac. I could maybe come up with some testimonials from the tribal side on broadband development. Fairly new at Fond du Lac. Maybe track down some business owners.
Okay, very good. Any other, there's no other topics on this. Again, like I said, there's nothing set in stone on this one yet. What I will do is start to work maybe on a kind of a skeleton or even a topics, kind of like an outline of what this might look like. I will see if I can share it before the next task force meeting. If not, we'll just share it as a draft at the next task force meeting. And then, like I said, if you have volunteers, Bernadine, I appreciate and Ann, obviously, for potentially actually helping with this. Like I said, I have one more that can help put the information together. I'm probably looking for a third. If you know someone that can help with that, that'd be great. Be more than happy to include them and assign them to some of the working groups as we start to pull this together as we move forward. I know it's a little more challenging. It's a bit easier if we were face to face and doing a lot of this together, but and remotely has been a challenge. But I still believe that we covered quite a bit of good ground, have some good recommendations in the pipeline of the thoughts we're thinking about, and some good testimonials and success stories, as well as what's not working, that we can pull together for a decent report. The other piece I did like the comments on, getting potentially engaged, or this task force getting more engaged at the present moment, not just from a report standpoint, but as things unfold, whether it's federal funding or how we think about pulling together private and public partnerships, how this task force can get engaged. So that's something I'll take back as well and see if we can how we can get ourselves involved in a variety of things besides just these meetings. That could be interesting too. So that's all I had for out of the agenda today. Any other outstanding questions or comments or things we need to discuss from a task force perspective, or task force members? I know we're ending a little bit early today. Like I said, there was supposed to be one other topic from the FCC. Didn't get a chance to get them on the hook today. We'll get them on the hook for next time for sure. Any other business from others outside of the task force that you'd want to make any comments at this moment?
Teddy, I hate to speak up because I feel like I've talked an awful lot today, but if we have just a minute, I'm wondering if maybe Steve Georgie wanted to take a minute to speak just a little bit more about the Minnesota Broadband Speed Test that was stood up. There was a press conference yesterday. Steve, are you on? You want to just share that good news with the task force? If not, I can talk a little bit more about it, but Steve's the real heartbeat behind this effort.
Well, sure, Bernadine. Yesterday, thanks to the good fortune of the Minnesota Rural Broadband Coalition and great fundraising efforts by Bernadine and others, we secured the financing to contract with Geo Partners and kick off the statewide crowdsourcing broadband speed test. Nathan Zacharias, who also served as the lobbyist for the coalition, is serving as a point person with Emily Murray from the Association of Minnesota Counties. They host the coalition's website. That's where, if you click on the test link that'll be circulating, it brings you to the coalition website. You can take the test there, and then there's a tab on that page, and you can click on the statewide map to see the results. So we're pushing it for about a 6-month time frame, so that we'll have hopefully a report and results that can be shared with the legislature. As discussed earlier in the meeting by others, we're going to be fighting for general fund dollars to keep the broadband border-to-border program viable, and that's definitely going to be a challenge going into the 2021 budget cycle. It's a great opportunity for Minnesota. We missed out being the leaders in the nation. Washington State jumped on board on Friday with the governor making an announcement on their initiative. That's also being conducted by Geo Partners. They're also working with Kentucky and Maine, looking at this because the data collection is real time from residents, and it clearly reflects that what's being reported to the FCC is not accurate. So there's hopefully we get good participation, and we can use that information to help secure more federal funding when it's available. And for those communities that jump on this, they may be able to get into this year's cycle for a border-to-border grant. So map is out there, and for the coalition that has control to the map, there's a lot of hidden information that we can access, and if a local county were to ask for access to that for a small fee, we'll make that available. But we want everybody to go back to that coalition website and see the value of the coalition and hopefully become a member. So it'd be a good project, and like I say, hopefully everybody takes the test when they get home.
Thank you, Steve, and thanks for bringing that up. And we'll see if that also could be maybe there's some progress that happens, and we can look at that at the next task force meeting. That could be interesting too. So with that, one thing in mind, if you have topics, and I mentioned FCC, there's probably this topic on the mapping. If there's other topics that we want to bring up, again, let Diane know. And then, we certainly prepare for these meetings ahead of time, make sure we get the speakers lined up and all that. So if there's things in the September timeframe, in addition to kind of that you think we should be reviewing, as you have discussions with the work subgroups, that would be something to bring up for sure. So I want to make sure I mention that. Any other business that we need to cover? Again, this is also open to anybody else that's not on the task force too, if you want to bring something up.
Eddie, if I may, one, because I kind of got cut off earlier when Brian brought up the issue of the task force being more engaged. There's a lot of confusion over what the CARES funds can be used for. And it's interesting that the MDE has determined that they can be used for devices and broadband connections. But from the state level, Myron Franz, during the legislative session, indicated that he didn't think broadband was an allowable expenditure. So getting clarification on that would be critical. I do know there are, I think, 3 or 4 counties in Minnesota that are reaching out to providers to do some shovel-ready projects, small in nature, connecting small businesses, things like that. But St. Louis County, I reached out to them, and they're just sitting back because they're uncertain that they can dedicate any funds for a broadband project of any sort. So it sure would have been nice to have a position, communicated by the governor, maybe through the task force on this matter, because the clock is ticking, and the communities and the counties that get the funding have till November 15th for cities and December 5th, I believe, for the counties to allocate it. So it would certainly be nice to get that clarification.
That is a good point, Steve. I agree. I'm not sure. I exactly know how it's going to be used either. So, yeah, some clarification on that would be useful. Okay. Other comments? Hearing none. Well, I appreciate everybody's taking time for this meeting, and the report outs and some of the work that's been going on. I think that's super exciting. We're getting closer and closer to making some recommendations, and points well taken. I think we need to figure out how we can get this task force to be a little more engaged with what's happening at the governor's office. I know it's a confusing time, and there's lots of things in the air, but nonetheless, I think this is an important time to really push on this broadband topic and being the backbone of what we do, how we do telework, telemedicine, and teleeducation in the future. So that is a super key and very much relevant topic at this time. So with that, I want to thank everybody for joining, and we will talk at the September meeting. All right, thank you, and have a good rest of the day and the good rest of the month. Take care.